Hello. Can everyone hear me? I always get worried, like whenever I start doing this stuff, that like nobody can actually hear me. Hello, welcome to the third stream. I'm gonna wait until like somebody says that they can hear me. Okay, perfect. Right, ready to go. All good. So tonight's stream, I am joined by the insightful and endlessly knowledgeable Reid, who is at Seriations on Twitter. He is an independent historian of science, focusing on the intersection of espionage and the occult in the Cold War. From controversial figures like Ira Einhorn and James Shelby Downard, and topics like Starseed, UFOs, Atlantis, and much, much more, Reid's highly informative Twitter threads and podcast appearances are must-reads and listens. And tonight he has kindly agreed to join me to explore probably one of the most bizarre cults, weird online, also offline groups I've ever researched. So yeah, let's welcome in Reid. Hello.
Hey.
Hi, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm very stoked to, I think you maybe we're underselling how bizarre this group is.
Yeah, I really am.
We've looked into some pretty weird topics, but these people are genuine.
Yeah. I would say that this is probably even more bizarre than like something like Montauk, just in terms of like the sprawling levels of weirdness.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
each iteration of their rebranding is just different layers and layers of strange.
It's incredibly strange. So you DM'd me about this, like, God, when was that? Like back towards the end of last year. I think you were like, oh, you know, you've got some weird interests. Have you ever heard of this group? And I had never heard of them before. How did you hear about them?
That's a good question. I think, I don't even remember at this point. When it might have been I think somebody sent the BBC Ulster series about them to me, because that came out just last year. That was probably it.
Right. Well, so let's get into what we're actually talking about. So Aristasia is like a strange, I don't even know whether calling it a cult is the right thing to call it. I think it probably was in one of its iterations, but it's almost like a kind of alternate reality game created by 1, 2, maybe 3 women in the 1970s. Kind of came out of, well, first of all, it kind of started as like almost like a goddess religion, right? So it kind of came out of like the larger goddess movement of the 1970s. And there were so many of like these strange little weird like goddess like religions. And when we were talking and when I was researching the group, there was a lot of like similarities between this group and like Wicca and like early Wiccan history. Do you think that's fair to say?
Definitely. In the sense of, I think the makeup of the group being primarily women for most of its history, as well as the kind of imagined, just made up mythical
totally
that Wicca also sort of appeals to, the claims of inheriting a many thousands of years long tradition passed from mother to daughter in secret.
Absolutely. And we'll get into a little bit more about their kind of made up history. So because this group is like so incredibly bizarre, and also like the timeline of this is like really hard to pin down, we're kind of dealing with like things that are all going to kind of overlap, and there's going to be a lot of names that keep popping up, because even though these are like only a few women involved in this, they've all got like a million alternate personalities and like alternate like egos, basically. So they've got like the Mary, one of the main characters in this is a woman. I think main character, it's like this is a real thing. But one of the main women involved in this is a woman called Mary. I'm just going to refer to her as Mary, but she's got like so many names. She goes by like Miss Martindale. Brigadier Colwyn, like 1,000 different names that she's got. And as we kind of go into this, you'll see that the names kind of correlate with different personalities. They've all got different ages. They're all into different things. It all just gets very, very bizarre, incredibly bizarre. So I guess like the question of what came first is a hard one to answer, but the first person that I want to talk about is probably the person that created this whole thing, just from like my perception of looking into it. But there might be some Aristasians in here that might disagree with me, but whatever. So she's a woman called Sister Angelina, and she appears to be from the Oxford area. And in Oxford, she was sometimes known as Amazon Jane. And she really had like an interest in this burgeoning goddess movement that was happening at the time. And she was specifically involved with a group called the Fellowship of Isis, which claimed to be a multi-faith, multiracial and multicultural spiritual organization focused on increasing awareness for the goddess Isis. So even if you're a part of like the Fellowship of Isis, you could still have your own like individual religious practice that had absolutely nothing to do with it. And they were founded in Ireland in 1976. And in July that same year, they released the first issue of their newsletter, which is called the Aishan News. And I got a little like slideshow just so we can make this more visual, to give you an idea of the history. And this is like one of the first places that you see this Sister Angelina, even though her name is like rubbed out here, that is the person that wrote it. And she is going to be one of the main people that go on to create this larger Aristasia. But in this article, she hang on a second. So she gets involved in like this Fellowship of Isis, and then later on, like as her kind of spiritual practice is developing, she claims to be involved in something called Lux Madriana, and she's quoted as saying that our faith is based on a body of myths and ideas. The purpose of Lux Madriana is to spread these ideas, to help people form Madrian groups, and also to encourage various projects, artistic, psychic, etc. You see, we believe that our faith can be introduced into every area of life. Some members are working on a Madrian tarot and Madrian witchcraft, and we hope later to author a course in Madrian ritual magic. So it's kind of like, even though she's involved in like this Fellowship of Isis like kind of group, she is kind of creating almost her own religion. And that is what this is. Like, even though she talks about Lux Madriana being this thing that's like ancient, it's got all of this history. All of the history is basically made up history created by this group and this woman. So in late 1976, Sister Angelina and others from her Madrian religion published their own newsletter called The Coming Age, which claims to be a Madrian review of religion, life, and culture. And apparently it was issued under the hands of the goddess by the Order of the Daughters of Artemis in Oxford. So that's where the goddess is, apparently. Was hanging out in Oxford, obviously. And that home in Oxford, she shared that with a woman called Donna Chrysothemis, but I think her birth name was Maureen Evans. And this first instalment of The Coming Age is supposedly issued also by the Daughters of Artemis. So if we go back, sorry, I'm a bit all over the place. I've never done like a live presentation of stuff, but in this, she also mentions the Daughters of Artemis in her appearances in this like Aishan newsletter. So like she's developing this religious practice over time. So the way that this religion of Madrianism is written about in these really early newsletters is almost as if these writers are uncovering an ancient religion that has been hidden. And people claim that these scriptures were like being revealed to this group in Oxford. And later on, they even speak about, I don't know if you came across this, Reid, but when I was listening to like some of their stuff, they speak about like going into like almost like not channeling per se, but almost like trance states. Like so there's a later like BBC podcast series about this that came out like last year or the year before. And there was interviews with one of the main women in this, and she would say that she would get like visions, and then she'd like tap into these kind of like visions.
Yeah, I remember reading a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. So it's kind of like there's no like explicit mention of they've channeled this, but it's kind of alluded to quite a lot through their writings, that these are like not necessarily channeled works, but they're tapping into something, so to speak. So they speak about recovering this thing called Madrian culture and returning to the goddess. And they promote the idea that female-ruled goddess-worshipping societies were once the universal form of human civilization, and that we need to return to that. And these were supposedly secret matriarchal communities that existed. And they claim that the Madrian faith and matriarchal order gave way to a cruder religion and a harsher way of life, which would lead eventually to the violence and materialism of the modern world. That's going to be a big theme running through this. And they also believed that most of history had been suppressed by the patriarchy. They've got a lot of Catholic imagery in a lot of their later works. They even talk about like purification, that you have to kind of confess. They created their own like religious holidays they call like the nativity, but it's not when like the regular nativity is. So there was all this, all of these kind of like religious, religious holidays that they'd created as well. They were also believers in the Cottingley fairies, and they had in their issue 7 of the Coming Age. I don't know, how do you feel about the Cottingley fairies, Reid? Real?
So, I mean, to our eyes, we're used to seeing fairly sophisticated hoaxes, even when you can tell that something is CGI or it's staged. And I've read sort of defenses of people who were true believers in the fairies, saying like, you know, people were less sophisticated back then with regards to the way that you could fake things using photography. But even sort of like being generous for people not understanding how that kind of process really works, I feel like it was pretty obviously not real.
Yeah.
The thing is like the sort of as soon as photography got developed as a widely available technology, there were all sorts of hoaxed spirit photographs and different ways of making it look like there were ghostly images, even in the late and mid 19th century. These were very trendy after the U.S. Civil War to sort of create these ghostly after images. And those look way more compelling than the Cottingley fairies. So I feel like people like Arthur Conan Doyle, who genuinely believed that they were real, I think they just strongly wanted to believe in fairies.
Yeah, and the Theosophists as well were big fans of that story. So how do you feel like, I'm going to just like kind of hand it over to you a little bit about like, because in all of their early writings, there is this real, like the thread that runs through it is that we have got to like return to this tradition, and that the material world is evil. Well, they don't expressly say like evil, but they just, in these texts, these like very early like texts from the group, but they're very much about like, the modern world is bad. What do you kind of think, like reading through some of their early stuff?
So they're definitely sort of working in response to a lot of other traditionalist philosophies and traditionalist. I guess you would call them part of a counterculture, but sort of overlapping with hippie movements and sort of, like you mentioned, new religions like Wicca, sort of a more conservative appeal to the idea of what's called the perennial philosophy. So this is a concept in traditionalism, the notion that there is an undercurrent of truth or an undercurrent of wisdom stretching far back into human history across not necessarily all, in their view, but most world religions and world traditions, that has been lost in modern times, and that we've been living in sort of a corrupted, sort of world dominated by reason and by technology, and ultimately as it often the paranoia leads to, sort of very anti-communist discourses about, modernity being a degenerate state of being. So at this point in their early era, they're very much sort of in that kind of cultic milieu of various, some political, some apolitical, some pretending to be apolitical groups, movements, and new religious organizations that are pushing back against what they claim are the ills of modern life.
Yeah, and they definitely try and emphasize that, we're not political, but as we will see later, they definitely are political. And they
protest way too much, saying that, we have nothing to do with questions of the modern world. We have a higher calling.
Exactly. And they were, I don't really, I'm not familiar with one of their main influences, but I know one of their main influences, I'm going to really mess up his name, Gunon. Is that right?
Yeah, he was. I think he was French. So I'm not going to try to correct you on that, because I think that's as close as I could get. I think Guénon maybe, but
potentially. But he was like, they say that they've even, I think in some, I'm not sure if it's in the Coming Age or whether it's in some of their later publications, but they even like pull quotes from him and put them in into some of their writings. So throughout this, like as they're kind of writing this, they're also like developing their theology almost. So they talk about things like they're developing a body of songs and like prayers and different things. So they're like this, and this is all kind of happening in like the late 70s. And they claim that even though Madrian life had barely even begun, the seeds had already been sown, and it was their belief that over the next century, we and our children will see them grow into a mighty tree. Now, they had very interesting beliefs about evolution. I don't think I've put it on the slides, which is, oh no, I did. That's it. They had really interesting beliefs about evolution. When I say interesting, I mean mental. They claimed that a particular type of body evolved until it became a suitable vessel for the incarnation of souls, and that a soul without a body is not human, and vice versa. They claimed that the first human beings were less rigidly bound to the body than we are, and that the caveman was a much later degeneration. So it's almost as if like humanity is like devolving in a way. They did not believe that the soul evolved. Instead, it developed through the spiritual faculty of moral choice. And they said that the collective name for humanity is made or made kind. So you'll see them, like I'm going to play some clips like later on, but you'll see that they refer to each other as maids. And that's because like I don't necessarily think that it's because men don't exist, but they've just kind of adopted this word. They don't, and they say that it actually came from, this is their explanation for it. It came from the same root as may, meaning to be able or to have the power to do something. It is essentially, this is from them, it is essentially the power to act or not act. Thus, maid is literally she who chooses. And they also make a note that man comes from manus, which is the lower mind or reason, which responds only to the material world, right? So like mankind is connected to the material. These gals ain't a fan of that. So I'm kind of doing like a whirlwind history. Stop me at any point, Reid, if you want to throw anything in. I'm a rambler. So that's what I do.
Will do. No, I think it's important to sort of get through the timeline very clearly. So
yeah.
You're all good.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we've gone forward again. So where am I? So one of the founders from the 1970s who wrote under the name Sister Julia did later admit in 2018 that all of their supposed origin stories, i.e. this ancient matriarchal religion that had existed secretly, was a total fiction. And Julia later said that we were aware that we had no living tradition. We believed or hoped that we were representing something not too unlike a feminine spiritual tradition that we postulated to have existed in the past. However, to make matters even more complicated, some people claim that Sister Julia never existed. So take with that what you may. So next up, in their evolution, if you will, the writers of the coming age had to promote their work. So they started to advertise in a feminist magazine called Spare Rib, and that began in January 1977 when they placed their first classified ad, which was under the group subheading, and it read, "Mother Goddess, an opportunity to meet witches who still honour the mother, learn about the role of women in the old religion." And from that first ad, they began to kind of explicitly promote this magazine of theirs called The Coming Age. And they listed their Oxford address, as you can see here. You'd write to them, you'd send your money off, and you would get The Coming Age back in return. They were also publishing ads in zines like Undercurrents, which was the magazine for radical science and alternative technology, Prediction magazine, which is apparently the world's first esoteric magazine, and also Private Eye. And they paid like per word. So as you can see, like in these ads, these are like really quite snippy when it comes to word counts, because they're like paying per word. And they also had a presence at different festivals and events, including the Aquarium Festival in London, and they ran a fundraising stall in Rochester in Kent. And I am from Kent.
Jump in for a second, Emily. I think it's very interesting that they were running ads in some of those sort of alternative science, sort of like fringe science publications, because that's very much cutting against something that they would regularly claim up until they sort of changed their tune in the late 80s, with their rejection of modern technology, or at least looking down upon the way that a lot of it is used. And it very firmly puts them in the orbit of the 1960s, 1970s sort of counterculture that people like Ira Einhorn were in. I've something I sort of have is like a white whale find would be some evidence that they were involved with his network, because he had contacts in the UK involved in sort of the either traditionalism or sort of like the aristocratic revanchism so them publishing in these sort of sciencey alternative tech magazines is very interesting to me, because it puts them in a sort of they're not just trying to be like Amish, living without technology, living in old traditional ways, as we'll see. They very much have a vision of the future.
Exactly, and they also make a massive point to say, "Oh, we're not New Age, we're not involved in anything like that." And they also are like in a bunch of like very kind of New Age adjacent zines and publications. Imagine if there was an overlap with Ira Einhorn. That would be insane. If he somehow found his way to the Aristasians. So these adverts and different events kind of acted as recruiting tools for the group. One member named Helen Gilmore actually found them via their ads in Private Eye. And she said, "I didn't know what to expect. There were only 5 of us, but it was a moving ceremony. It had an impact on me. I was 29, and until then, the only religious experience I'd had was as a child at the local Methodist church. And it was so impactful that she ended up giving up her full-time job, and she went to live with the group, where she was appointed the title Lady of the Temple." Now, at this point, I'm going to introduce another character into the world of Aristasia. And she's a woman who, like everyone in this strange world, goes by many different names. But back in 1979, she was simply known as Mary Scarlett. And she went to university in 1971. And there, she claims to have started the first ever women's consciousness raising group. And one of the women that attended this consciousness raising group was a woman named Snowy James. and she was the sister of a woman called Jenny James, who was the founder of the Atlantis Primal Therapy Commune, otherwise known as the Atlantis Foundation, or simply the Screamers, because they practiced primal screaming. So I'm going to play a clip. It's like 2.5 minutes long. And it's a glimpse of life at Atlantis. The two girls arguing in this clip are the daughters of both Snowy and Jenny James. And this will kind of give you an idea of what life was like at the Atlantis commune.
I just feel absolutely violently angry. I don't know
why. Why do you feel angry?
I just hate the way that you're talking about. Just hate the way that you're treating me. Why? I just hate it. I just hate the way that you're acting as if I'm nothing, as if you think that you're on top of me or something. I just hate the way that you're acting as if...
What's so terrible about what I'm doing?
Because it's just as you're dismissing me, as if I'm some little squirt or something rather, as if you don't like me, and as if I'm
I don't like you at all.
I don't like it. I just want you to stay there, and for me to stay here, and to just scream abuse at each other. That's just what I really want. I just want to just completely scream abuse at you. I just want to say to you, I just want to say to you with some kind of cover, I think you're a bitch, and I think you're a and I think you're horrible to treat me the way you're treating me.
I don't know what to do.
I just hate you for the way that you're treating me. I just hate it.
Saying you hate me, and she's saying yes, she does.
I hate you for everything. I hate you for coming and being prettier than me. I hate you for getting boyfriends for more than I do. I do hate it. And I hate it that you seem to be able to get more than I do.
We call someone who's well balanced someone who can get angry when they feel it, someone who can cry when they feel it, someone who can show love when that's what they feel. If you call well balanced someone who's always like that, calm and smooth, no, she's terribly unbalanced.
It upsets you, but I mean, like, I'm not going to go around and change that. And I don't think I've been acting horribly or disgustingly for the last few months. I've just been acting the way that I feel like acting.
Well, I don't like you for it. I don't like how it is now, which is that, oh, well, Sally's all right now, and Sally can be on top, and Sally's got all the support of Jenny and Snow behind her, and it's going to be all right now. Everything's going to be
simply rivalry, is it again now?
Yes, all right, it is.
Sally seems to have a grudge against Becky. Now, what possible good is it allowing Sally to work off her grudges on your daughter Becky?
I see. What possible good it is the fact that it's there anyway. If Becky and Sally are relating, the feelings that are in Sally, Becky would be the very first person to want Sally provoked. She'd be the first person to want that brought out of Sally, simply because if it's not, she'll feel it as a vibration, she'll feel it as a tension. She'll hate her, she'll want to cut off from her. We actually want people to express their aggression towards us because it's then dealable with, it's seeable, touchable, feelable, and it's not just a horrible sort of feeling of something going on under the surface. That is what we want.
So Tanner says therapy, but make it an angry drunk getting kicked out of a club, which is accurate. And Smith says average British conversation, which is, also quite accurate. That clip actually was recorded at their house in Donniport in Ireland, which is important. So just to bear in mind for where the people that we're following end up, and also important to note that Mary had that relationship with one of the women in the video prior to any of this. Also, just to note, Jenny James, who is the woman interviewed in that, was once quoted as saying, "We don't set an age at which a child is a sexual creature. If they want to sleep with each other at 9 or 10, that's fine," which gives you an inkling as to what life was like for children in that group. And also Mary said that she temporarily became a screamer herself through her friendship with Jenny's sister, Snowy. So Mary claimed to be a school teacher and had been an avid reader of Spare Rib herself. In June 1975, she placed this ad in the magazine. where she asked if there were any women interested in a weekend in the country and do poems, write stories, etc. She also apparently had an interest in Gestalt psychology. And in 1978, she was running therapy sessions and workshops for women at the Pelling Institute in London. And she is still connected to the Pelling Institute, as her name now is Mary Gilliman. So Mary discovered Lux Madriana through the classified ads in Spare Rib and began to receive issues of the coming age, and she would attend different spiritual festivals to meet up with other members of the group. And in the 15th issue of The Coming Age, which was released in the summer of 1980, she writes this article here called Discovering the Goddess, where she writes about how as a child she understood intuitively the evils of men's ways and how she wished that she could have become a Madrian at a young age. And she says that as a child she was shy and well behaved, but deliberately forced herself to become confident and outspoken. She claims to have been hardened through humanism into revolutionary mouthings, and eventually she found what she called the silly, paganized distortion of the mother that was prevalent at the time amongst feminist groups. So kind of moving into their second era now. So according to a later interview with Mary, the idea of forming an actual in real life community came around in 1979, and eventually either in 1980 or 1981 the group moved from Oxford to Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire. And we know this because in 1980 there was definitely a group operating in Hebden Bridge. They called themselves the Madrian College of Ritual Magic, and they advertised in the Q directory, which was the UK occult directory. What do you think about the Q directory, Reid? Any thoughts?
It sends me spiraling with paranoia, because even most people think QAnon when they think Q, but Q as a letter designation has some interesting occulted meanings. It's the highest level of security classification in the United States national security system, mostly for nuclear secrecy. So anytime it pops up with this sort of thing, it sends me into one of those. It's like a numerological coincidence almost. You really gotta temper yourself to not fall into a mad spiral with that stuff.
Yeah, we've already done enough spiraling. Can't let Q tip you over the edge. So they eventually moved into a 3-story house, which is this house. Thanks to the Yorkshire Examiner Live, they doxed them, not me. And at this time, there are around 8 of them. And the article that I got this from has a bunch of recollections from locals and their neighbours. And it says that some villagers remember them wearing Laura Ashley style dresses. I don't know if everyone that's watching this is aware of what a Laura Ashley style dress is, but it's kind of it looks very kind of like traditional. It's very floral, very feminine. And they also wore tea towels as headscarves. And one woman named Eileen O'Brien is quoted as saying that the Madrians lived in the big house opposite the road down to the station. I remember them wearing all white, a bit like nuns. I was roped in at one time to babysit during one of their weddings at the Birchcliffe Centre. I remember a circle was drawn on the floor and the woman stood on the circle and invited the man to join her there. No idea how I got involved. They were intriguing, seemed intelligent, and then disappeared. So Mary later said that during their first years as a community, they attempted to think and act as if they were in ancient times. She claims that Sister Angelina was the spiritual superior due to her incredible metaphysical knowledge, and that the two were in a mother relationship, with Mary playing the part of the mother. And Mary claimed that this was part of what they later called life theatre, with members taking on different names and different personas. And she said that the spiritual superior didn't have an adult persona, that the spiritual superior was only ever seen as like a child. So like even in these very like early days of their religious movement, whatever you want to call it, their cult, they are kind of covertly amongst themselves saying that like being a child is like when you're like spiritually enlightened, you go into this kind of childlike state, almost like they reference like childlike wonder and stuff like that quite a lot. So it was during this time at Hebden Bridge that they began to claim that they belonged to something called the Rhennes community. And in an article in the Halifax Evening Courier, the journalist that met with them claims that the Rhennes have a traditional, this is from the article, have a traditional matriarchal way of life. It is claimed and that it has been handed down mother to daughter for millennia. The Rhennes families live secret lives dotted over Europe and the British Isles. But of course, this isn't true. The Rhennes are just an evolution of the original Lux Madriana group. They're effectively the same people. And John Avison, who's the journalist who goes to Hebden Bridge, he interviewed a woman called Lady Alethea Theomora, who is suspected to be Sister Angelina. Remember, these people go by a million different names. By the light of a log fire and oil lamps. And he writes that the women refer to themselves as maids. And obviously, remember, that's a callback because maid kind, we're not mankind, we're maid kind. They wore long dresses and covered their heads. The interesting thing about this kind of early stage is that there are men present here, and men kind of become present a bit later on, but they go through this, as we'll see, they go through this kind of period where they kind of shun men, but at this time the men are still very much present. And apparently Sister Angelina said that since the beginning of civilization there have only been two philosophies, the older one being that the spirit is feminine and matter is masculine, and that that one is an expression of the other, and the later one that the real and only material, oh God, I mess this quote up. And the later one, that the real and only world is the material one. You've got to forgive me. Like I'm trying to read nonsense here. Like they write in this like really frilly, flowery way, and it doesn't lend to reading out loud quite well. So in this article, this is kind of the first inkling that we get that the followers are not, they believe that they're not practicing a religion, and that they, in fact, kind of living an alternative reality, like a completely different life to the rest of us. And he says that they've got their own oral and written language as well as their own alphabet. And they claimed to have been preparing for the day that we will all return to worship Mother God. And that day will be the first of a golden age. So it's kind of right at the beginning, you've got this idea that they're like almost playing with reality somewhat. That they're like.
Something I've just noticed, sorry to interrupt, Emily, is the.
No,
Rhennes
please
symbol,
do interrupt.
The Rhennes symbol that they've got there. What does that remind you of? A little familiar to something that we'll see later on as well.
Yes, it is. It's the Celtic cross, and it props up quite a lot. What do you think about like this idea that they're saying they're not a religion, but they're like living in this alternate reality?
It's a very interesting notion, because it sort of, when I first saw that when I first read that, because they repeat that idea throughout all of their many identities, and it struck me as it's almost incoherent idea at first, because it kind of raises the question of what do you mean by religion and what do you mean by living in an alternate reality. But the more that I was thinking about it, I do think that's what they were doing, because they're very self-consciously, they know that they're making stuff up. They don't seem like they're particularly attached to the mythology that they're building, other than the basic sort of traditionalist critique that's at the heart of it. So I think, as we'll sort of discuss later on, they are very much in the more in the sphere of people like the Society for Creative Anachronism, LARPers, sort of living out these alternate ways of being. So I think we can sort of take that at face value as being a statement of genuinely what they saw themselves as doing.
Yeah, absolutely. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to mention that. So who's the? There's the. Oh, he's an academic, and he's written a book about traditionalist movements. I've forgotten his name, but he writes about Aristasians. Is it Mark? Is it like Mark Sedgwick? Do I want to say like Mark Sedgwick?
The book is Against the Modern World.
Yeah. So in that, he writes a version of this that I think, from doing like more research on it, that I think has almost been given to him by this crew. And the version that he's written in the book isn't like the actual reality version. It's like it's kind of their reality. It's like the imagined reality. I can't remember exactly like what he wrote, but when I was reading it earlier, I was like, this isn't right. They've definitely, and I think that he even got a lot of that information because he interviewed one of them, and they gave him some information, which I don't think was completely accurate, but he put it in his book anyway. So if we move on to the next bit, oh God, this slideshow is so annoying. So here you're going to see that it's March 1980, but already some people have clocked on to the fascist undercurrents of Lux Madriana / the Rhennes philosophy. And this is a letter that somebody wrote into Peace News, saying that they were concerned about the advertisements of Lux Madriana, describing themselves as the matriarchal tradition. Because this religion is in fact yet another form of fascism. It preaches obedience to an authoritarian hierarchy. It is against the fundamental rights of free speech and thought, and expressly denies equality, democracy, sexual freedom, indeed all the freedoms that publications like Peace News stand for. The last 2 issues of their magazine, that's referring to the coming age, make this position quite clear. I'm sorry to appear intolerant, but I feel that someone ought to speak out about this. And I mean, they are right. And it also is quite interesting about what you were saying earlier, Reid, that they claim to not be part of this counterculture, but they're in all of these like counterculture magazines and newsletters, and like some people are like reading it and they're like clocking on, they're like, hang on a minute, this is a little bit sus, this group.
Mm-hmm. They're not as sneaky as they like to think.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this article, John Avison writes that a supporter in Ireland was offering the Rhennes a large house with lots of land for £20,000 or £5 a week rent. That was the house that formerly belonged to Jenny James and the Atlantis commune / the Screamers that we just saw. And Mary claims in a later interview that she somehow discovered that their house was for sale and they arranged to buy it, but they didn't have the full money. And she says she can't remember how they discovered that it was still for sale. So they must have still just been in contact through the years. Either way, in 1982, they were packing up from Hebden Bridge and moving to Burtonport, and they renamed the building, the former Atlantis building, and Drockhead Bayou, or the Living Bridge, and they captured the attention of the local press, who had also documented the Screamers. So they've already moved into kind of an infamous house, and they're still going to get the heat from it. So the news channel RTE actually visited with them in November 1982, and I can show you, hang on a second, a clip from it now.
All of them are strangers. They came to Burtonport in West Donegal 2 months ago. New faces with faith in ancient traditions. Their last base was in a smallish Yorkshire town, but it's here, next door to the raw Atlantic, they plan to establish their village. It's to be a sanctuary from the modern world. All but one of this advanced party are female. They reject the term woman. Instead they use maid. Man is an acceptable phrase, but the role he has played in most civilizations over hundreds of years has no place in this community. It's spurned as heresy.
I love that, spurned as heresy. Also, in this kind of piece that RTE did on them moving to Burton Port, we also get an interview with Sister Angelina. So this is the first time that we get to see her, and here she is.
We are Rhennes. The Rhenish tradition is the most ancient religious and cultural tradition in these islands, that is to say in Britain and in Ireland. And we worship God as the Mother, and everything we do is centered around that worship. And by everything we do, we mean not only our acts of worship, but also the crafts we practice, the work of all kinds that we do, or songs or stories. Everything is part of that tradition.
Long, long ago, when the world was younger than it is now, though not so young as it had been before at Timas.
Within this large old building by the sea, music and storytelling are now daily occurrences. The language is rich and strange. It's the Rhenish tongue, dating back to the 14th century.
It doesn't date back to the 14th century, it dates back to like the late 1970s.
It's really interesting how credulous so much of the media coverage that they got was, just taking everything they said at face value.
Absolutely. I guess to give them a benefit of the doubt, I guess it's a different time, and they, you know, they can't look it up as easy. But yeah, like they're just. I feel it's funny as well because when they're like singing and stuff, they're just singing in English, but like with a funny accent. Like they've just made up like a new accent. It's just ridiculous. So they're in Burton Port, and things seem to fall apart relatively quickly. And in an article that was published in 1999, Helen Gilmore, who was she was present in Burton Port in the early days in this house here. She said that people had to appear busy but had nothing to do. There was a spiritual malaise, a lack of discipline and organisation which ruined the community, and it filtered down from the leadership. But despite this, they did manage to publish the Book of Rhennes at the beginning of January 1983. And they claimed that it was the definitive introduction to matriarchy and the feminine tradition. And they reiterated their belief that the entire doctrine of human progress was a falsehood devised in self-justification by the most inferior epoch of human history. And they made the bold statement that the process of human development has been a long, slow decline, which had been rapidly accelerating over the last few millennia, which is lovely. So at some point, there appears to have been a change in the group, because by May 1983, they were referring to themselves as the Silver Sisterhood. And although there had been a man living with them previously, they decided men are no longer allowed. And they even republished this book, the Book of Rhennes, with a little slip inside it, like a little insert that says that basically we've rebranded. We're now called the Silver Sisterhood, and we are an all-female community. So again, and it seems this is like a running theme as well. Every time they have a rebrand, the press seems to show up. I don't know whether it's because they're just issuing press releases and they absolutely love the publicity. But the news channel RTE go to visit with them again, and they get an interview with Mary, who at this point is going by the name Sister Brecker. And we can see her here.
Well, early this year, new tenants moved in. They call themselves the Rhenish community. And when we visited them in January, they talked of the matriarchal society they wish to set up. They believe God is a woman, and they have a 4-foot statue to honour her in their garden. That time we called, there was a male member among the community. He has since left. And the women, or maids as they call themselves, have changed a little too, as we discovered last week.
In this room here, we're going to be opening a craft shop and tea rooms. We felt that there was very little opportunity in the village for people to have a civilised cup of tea, as it were, because there just wasn't that facility available. And so we'll be doing farmhouse lunches with the help of our cow and our chickens. We'll be producing fresh salads from the garden and that sort of thing.
There is a very definite evidence to support such aspirations. In fact, work in the Rhennes craft shop is proceeding at an extraordinary rate. The tea room and lunch service is to be extended to include the offer of bed and breakfast. And all of those who come here in search of food and lodgings will surely be impressed by the religious devotion of this unusual community.
When we clear the gardens, we're not clearing the gardens and making that room look nice just so that we can make money. It's like that everything we do is because we love God, and she's the centre of our lives. So that when we're working, we chant her name, we sing songs to her. And far across the sea doth the tyrant ruler slay, we have no rain but share. Hi, hi, Rhennes, hi, 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 hey. Hi, hi, Rhennes, hi, we have no rain but share. King Reid was a wicked man was he. King Reid was a wicked man was he. As tall as thread and twists the seas, as broad as I know tread.
Now, Sister Brecca and her colleagues recognise there are difficulties in attracting a male to live in this community in the long term, but it's not a problem they're too worried about. They think they'll eventually overcome it.
Men are used to a position of privilege and power in patriarchal society, and when they come here, it's a different order of things, and they're looked after with loving kindness, and everything is has the potential to be very harmonious and gentle and loving, but they do find it a little difficult, and so we're just spending this time building up our community with maids, but that will change in the future.
Any thoughts on Mary, Reid? What's the vibe?
I've always gotten very negative vibes from her. I just, even when she's sort of, speaking that flowery language and sort of talking about the way they're building this community, I get not exactly Jim Jones vibes, but I can just tell she's got a darkness.
Yeah, definitely. Vancouver guy says these outfits look like the fundamentalists I run into in Utah. It's definitely, there's definitely a lot of similarities, a lot of overlap. So later on, a woman who called herself Madriana Olga, who was part of a different Madrian order, said that the group in Burtonport were strongly influenced by the lesbian separatist ideas around that time, and the ones, only two I believe, who were lesbian remained, cut themselves off from everyone who were their loyal supporters and adherents, and dropped everything that they had built up. I'm assuming that that's referring to Sister Angelina and Mary being the only two that remained. I think that maybe that happens like a little later on though. At the beginning of 1983, they did begin publishing a magazine called Artemis for women who love women. And issue 6 of this magazine contains what I think is the first reference to the Aristasian concept of the two genders, blonde and brunette. Which kind of appear later on. I don't know if we're going to have time to get into blondes, brunettes and stuff. We're probably going to have to do a part 2 to get into all of the online nonsense that happened a lot later. So in September 1983, a woman named Janet McCrickard wrote about Lux Madriana and the group in Burtonport for the magazine Woman's Spirit. Mary, who at that time was using the name Brigida Colwyn, wrote a letter in response to the article, which appeared in the December 1983 issue of Women's Spirit, which I don't have here, I can't show you. I think in that issue, Janet basically called them a cult, because Mary came back saying, "We are not a cult, but a culture." And she reiterates that their community is female only. She signed off the letter with, "May she be with you." Now, at some point in late 1983, a woman named Buckwheat Turner went to stay with the group, and her experiences are written in this article for the April 1984 issue of Woman's Spirit. And Mary meets her and explains that the community is hierarchical and that she is the head, which reflects the will of the goddess. All maids that encounter her must curtsy as a sign of respect. Fridays are a day of fasting, breakfast and lunch is skipped, and they only have an evening meal. And apparently afterwards, after the meal, Mary and Sister Angelina did a dance for Buckwheat to reflect the story of Buckwheat's soul, which I'm sure was wonderful. Interpretive dance. So Sister Angelina tells Buckwheat that the concept of equality was fostered by the patriarchy to keep folk from being able to act effectively together. And Reid, you put a note on there saying that this is very common on the right today, this notion that equality is simply a vehicle to break up the family.
Yeah, and it's something that we see in this group's rhetoric quite a lot that is also common today, especially in the sort of more trad-coded right, that things like women entering the workforce or other sorts of ways of getting integrated into in modern society, breaking down gender barriers, are just ways of, like you mentioned, breaking up the family, or just taking particularly women out of their natural state, which for all of their sort of feminist coded lesbian separatist kind of image, this group firmly sort of agrees with that vision for what women are supposed to do.
Absolutely, and it will become a lot more overt the further we go on. They have like a full-on mask off moment where they're no longer even bothering to hide who and what they are. So they kind of reinforce this hierarchical structure, and they say that some maids like to tell others what to do and some maids like to be told what to do. In that same issue, a woman named Helen Davis wrote a letter claiming, and that's like at the bottom here where it says, "Dear Woman Spirit," claiming to have visited with the Silver Sisterhood and proclaimed that if you want blood and fire in your veins and tenderness in your heart, then they are worth a visit. But 1984 was the beginning of a new and even more bizarre era for the group in Donniport. This is the St. Bride's era that now begins. So at some point in September 1983 and January 1984, the group decided to begin running a series of classified ads in national newspapers like the Sunday Telegraph. This is one that ran in the Observer. They called it Ripping Fun, and they were inviting people to spend a week as a schoolgirl in Burtonport. And according to a former member called Helen Gilmore, the group needed to raise funds, so they advertised a fantasy role-play holiday. This was supposedly a holiday for women to come and regress into Victorian schoolgirls. Now, some of the women that had been at the house at the time who were attracted to kind of these more like the original ideas that Lux Madriana and the coming age were talking about decided to leave. They say that things had begun to change and that Sister Angelina and Mary were mysterious and also demanding. They said that areas of the house were out of bounds and secret, and one of them said that she felt that something was wrong but she couldn't put her finger on it. And as one poster on Tumblr would later say, when their interest changed, i.e. Sister Angelina and Mary, the game changed. Anyone who stuck around was welcome to stay. Anyone who didn't was another brief visitor. Just that reference of like the game, which just makes me think like, again, like this is like an alternate reality for them, right? Like this is no longer really like a religion. It is just, they are playing like an alternate reality game. So I'm going to play you another brief clip because there's just so much of this archival stuff. It is actually crazy. So this is from 1984 when they've kind of rebranded as this like Silver Sisterhood, St. Bride's era.
Well, there are still members of the Silver Sisterhood living here, of course, but we decided that we wanted to use the resources that this house offers. And especially as it was, as you probably know, once was built to be a hotel. And it's in fact two houses in one, a house on the front and a house on the back. And we decided, well, we should run holiday courses here. And we would like to do something unusual. And so we came up with St. Bride's.
Now, the last time I visited you, you were speaking the Rhennes dialect and you were worshipping God as a woman. Has all that changed?
We've never worshipped God as a woman because God is God. We worship God as the mother and her daughter. That has not changed. That's our private beliefs. We don't introduce it into St. Bride's because it's a non-sectarian school. If girls from Ireland come here, they will be free to go to Mass on Sunday. The Protestants come here, they can go, well, their services aren't so regular here, of course, but as people worship, so they may worship.
In its sales brochure, St. Bride's staff suggest modern man lives in a state of quiet desperation. The school here is put forward as an opportunity to start afresh, to undo the knots of a modern upbringing and to return to the happy exuberance of childhood days. So far, there hasn't been a rush of applicants for the courses. To facilitate our filming, local girls were brought in as extras to help explain the principles of the St. Bride's approach.
I think that the appeal of this holiday can be quite varied, that people can come because it's an unusual holiday, or because it's in a beautiful part of Ireland, or because of the other side of the course, as it were, that they may feel that they've been forced into adulthood too quickly, that they didn't experience a carefree young adolescence, or for a mixture of reasons.
Now, the girls we're filming are actually local girls because the course isn't actually full at the moment.
That's right.
Are you having difficulty attracting people, or are people beginning to come now?
Oh no, people are beginning to come, but you must understand we've only been open for a few weeks. Are the tourists in Dunlow yet? They're perhaps coming now. The course is run as a completely traditional girls' boarding school, an old-fashioned kind of boarding school, so that there's classes from 9 till 3 each day, with morning and afternoon breaks and a break for lunch. And the classes include a variety of subjects. Do you want me to say? English, literature, English grammar, mathematics, simple or advanced level, art appreciation, music, singing, calligraphy. A slightly unusual subject where we learn Irish uncial. And then at 3 o'clock, the girls are left to themselves more. They could play in the junior common room, play games, go for walks, play outside, have afternoon tea in their private study, that sort of thing.
Since this house near the seafront in Burtonport reopened as St. Bride's, foreign journalists and film crews have far outnumbered fishermen in the village. They've come from Japanese television, from US television company ABC, from the BBC's 60 Minutes, from The Guardian, the Daily Mail and the Daily Express newspapers. Mind you, few, if any of them, saw the Silver Sisterhood a year beforehand. Some of the publicity has been unkind. Now, you've got lots of publicity, some very good publicity, some bad publicity, suggesting there was almost a gay element to the activities here. How do you feel about that kind of publicity?
Well, it's insidious. I had a personal involvement in a sort of social work kind of capacity, a social interest, 12 years ago when I was a student. There's nothing further than that.
And how do you feel the press is treating you in general? Are they taking you seriously?
More seriously than they started to. The first time I was on 60 Minutes, I thought the interview wasn't taking us too seriously. But on the whole, I think when people have got used to the idea and they see that we're really serious and that the mayor of the Rosses came to the opening and that local people came to the opening, they just understand that Donegal people know we're serious and we know we're serious, and gradually that atmosphere of thinking it can't really be true seems to be fading from the publicity.
Can I get a vibe check on that, Reid? What are your thoughts?
I mean, the vibes are getting worse because the transition from just sort of, goddess religion, kind of cult leader to we're now running this very structured school and sort of this, her demeanor is really leaning into sort of an authoritarian persona that is just kind of gives me chills knowing what we know. But even when I first saw that clip, I just thought, this is not someone who should be allowed to even pretend to run a school.
Yeah, it's all a little strange, and all the people that you see in the that video, they're all like local women that were brought in as actors. They didn't actually have anyone. I'm just noticing as well on that ad that I've got on the screen, it's like the top one's Real Fires, then it's St. Bride's, then it's the School of Hypnosis. Just all all like slotted in neatly together.
Yeah, you could just pop over to St. Bride's for your lessons and then go get hypnotized.
Exactly, perfect. Exactly. What more can you want? So the school opened officially on April 3rd, 1984, and its openings was captured by another film crew, this time from the BBC. And I'll just show you a bit of that now. So much archival.
It is a holiday, and some people come just because it is a holiday. But it can also have deeper significance.
So what sort of deeper significance?
Well, discovering the magic of childhood, discovering the possibility of living in a world where you can be enthusiastic, where you can get excited, where you can be quiet without being pestered about it, where you can, in particular, experience with the other girls warmth and friendliness and openness without fear of rejection.
After lunch, it was going to be boring old maths. But what a corking treat. Those quaint locals have turned up, and they're awfully friendly. Gosh, they really do think it's super to have a new school in the village.
I should like to thank you all for coming here today to be present at the opening of our school. And when the doors of the school are opened, we look forward, thinking of the many girls who will pass in and out of that same door in the years to come.
The response from the local community here at Burton Port House in Brides is one of admiration and enthusiasm that such a school has been founded here.
The picturesque Rosses in the heartland of Donegal, with its seemingly endless stretches of unspoiled beaches and panoramic sea vistas, has steadily gained a reputation as one of Ireland's, and indeed Europe's, most beautiful and inexpensive places to holiday.
That local mayor was terribly sweet about the whole thing, although he did seem to go on a jolly long time about what's here for the local tourists.
Backed up by homely farmhouse accommodation, excellent fishing facilities, there are over 100 lakes in the Rosses.
Still, he eventually got round to St. Bride's.
And I now have great pleasure in formally declaring St. Bride's officially open.
So when I watch that, I'm like, the thing that I think about the most is like how they've got the mayor there. Like they managed to bring in like the mayor.
Yeah, how podunk is this village that the mayor thinks this is something that really needs to be pushed through?
Oh my God, and all those poor kids there. Just,
yeah. I really, I mean, let's hope they were just there as sort of marketing props.
Yeah, because it's weird, especially because, as we'll see, like going into it, like the like materials that they produce to advertise the school, they had like two different kind of like messaging. Like we'll see it as I go further. Yeah, it's just very weird, like how local community were like, oh yeah, a new school, a holiday school. Little did they know what the horrors that were to come. So in a recent interview with the BBC podcast Assume Nothing, which I'm going to leave, like, I can't like make a list of all of the sources at the moment and like pin it, because I can't pin any comments for this stream, but I will put all of the sources, everything that I used, and all of like Reid sources as well, put it all in the notes, and so you can go through it yourself. But there's a BBC podcast called Assume Nothing, which we've kind of referred to a little bit previously, that came out like a couple of years ago, that did interviews with people that were involved, and also interviewed Mary. And Mary said that what we would have liked to do was draw people to the spiritual faith, but people didn't come. We got smaller instead of bigger. She claimed that the physical aspect as well as the spiritual aspect didn't draw people, but they didn't mind about numbers because part of their beliefs are quality over quantity. She said that they were trying to create a personal and spiritual transformation and see what we could do with creating a little world, which I think we did quite well at. So along with this grand opening, they created 2 different pamphlets for St. Bride. So this is what I'm talking about. And they both had like very different content. So this yellow pamphlet is very much emphasis is on you're an adult woman, but when you come to St. Bride's and you step through that door, you become a child. So they say that St. Bride's exists in the golden age of love and innocence, and it allows girls to experience the gentle, natural unfolding of childhood's golden Indian summer. And they claim that if you go to St. Bride's, most girls end up regressing to an age between 13 and 16, and that spontaneous regression to a younger childhood can take place. Some girls like to develop parts of their neglected personalities. They choose a new name and a new persona. And they claimed that the BBC TV producer who produced that clip we just watched said to them, referring to women, I keep calling them girls. After a few minutes at St. Bride's, it is impossible to think of them as grown women anymore. So we've got this real emphasis on age play, right? That when you go here, you become a child. And again, that kind of fits in with their spiritual views as well, that like childhood, we need to regress to a more pure state, and they see childhood as being that pure state. What do you think about that, Reid?
It's certainly not a unique idea within the kind of hippie-ish new age counterculture that they're coming out of, but the age regression stuff and the emphasis on that is one of the things that when I was first researching this group really stood out to me as deeply concerning, because that kind of age regression is commonly used, not commonly used, but it's especially in this period of time, something that would, like past life regression, be something that you would do as either a therapy or as a way to sort of experience your earlier memories, or to connect with your inner child and that sort of thing. But it can be a very people who go through it and for whom hypnosis is effective, it can be a very sort of troubling experience. People can have a very strong reaction to it, and it's not all happy-go-lucky. You know, as they put it, experiencing childhood's Indian summer. It can bring up traumas. It can be a complicated experience for people, and it's a very in a cult setting, a very powerful way of getting someone under your control if you have that kind of power dynamic with them, where you're giving them or you're putting them into a infantilized state of mind.
Absolutely. And I think about who this kind of group would appeal to. And I think of like how they come out of these kind of goddess movements. And we spoke about Wicca a little bit earlier. And I know that myself, when I was an angsty, like 13-year-old, miserable, a little bit troubled and whatever, that I very much gravitated towards stuff like Wicca, especially because of mainly for the aesthetic of it, but a lot of these kind of like subcultures can attract people that may have like, you know, some issues and their own like trauma and stuff. So to see like that they advertise like this, and they explicitly advertise, you know, that you'll come and you'll regress into a child, especially knowing what they do, or as we will find out, what they did at this school, it all becomes a little bit disturbing. In this prospectus as well, they talk about how Mary used to work at a primary school in London. And I think that is true. I think I managed to verify that, but she worked at a primary school. I've forgotten what it's called now. But it was very kind of like, I think it was like the first open plan primary school in the UK in London, where like the children wouldn't have like a set like routine or like set like structured classes. It's quite well known and popular. And Mary today, Gilliman today, is a child psychologist. So no comment there from me. So this white pamphlet is almost like written as if it is going to like a parent. It's like it's written as if like you're sending your child there. So it's almost like when you read this, you're almost like in your regressed state yourself, or like you're reading it as like a parent. It's very bizarre, like the wording of it, and it just kind of like carries on. Talks about like what the day at St. Bride's is like for the girls that go there. And as you can see here, this is a photo. And again, these women are all just local women that were paid to show up. They aren't actual students. They were never students at St. Bride's or people that actually went to St. Bride's. But you can see there, one of them is on the stairs and it says childhood thoughts. So although they had tried to keep it somewhat hidden, the press soon found out about the corporal punishment that was actually used at St. Bride's. An Evening Standard ran this article where they claimed to have found 4 exercise books in the house which detailed the punishments that had been received by the women. And they confronted Mary on this list of punishments that they'd found. And she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. This is nonsense." But then also changed tact and said, "It must be a joke of the girls. The truth, of course, is there is no corporal punishment." But of course, this was a lie. There absolutely was a corporal punishment element involved in St. Bride's. In fact, it was a huge part of their spiritual philosophy, and they claimed that it wasn't sexual, that there was a softness and sensual element of it. And I'm just going to play a brief bit of a later interview with Mary where she talks about the physical discipline. And this is from the BBC podcast.
When you're surrendered to God away from physical discipline, or if you're surrendered to the being punished in physical discipline, there's a very sensual feeling that's to do with the surrender, to do with trusting and surrender. And in the case of when you're lucky enough to feel it in relation to God, it's about wanting union. There's a verse in one of our scriptures: the soul is like a doe longing for water, longing to be united with the divine. So we're about life in all its fullness, but we're about life in all its fullness for higher reasons, for lifting up the human soul.
Do you mind if I ask, though, if I were to be devil's advocate, do you understand why others might not have understood that? They interpreted it differently.
Well, that's their business.
Yeah.
Our business was to, in a way, we allowed to market to that tendency because we had to survive in the world. Mm-hmm. We kept our integrity. We kept we're only going to like the edge of what, we are letting this be appeal to you, but we are staying within what's pure and allowable for us.
So that's her talking about the surrendering to God via physical discipline. What do you think about that, Reid?
I mean, it's funny that they're taking sort of the same approach as some other particularly hardcore religious groups. There's plenty that sort of use sort of shows demonstrations of faith involving self-flagellation or even something like firewalking. But it's a very it just immediately sets off alarm bells for me. For this is witting sort of testing of behavior modification, because that notion of sort of turning your experience of discipline, pain used as discipline in this weird school setting, while you are encouraging people to sort of infantilize themselves and act like they're a child again, and make it this sort of spiritual experience where submitting to her, the instructor who runs the school, is actually submitting to a higher power. And I think she sometimes in this period would characterize it in that sense as well, that, oh, I'm not the one administering the corporal punishment. I'm just like a vehicle for a higher power, which is a great excuse if you want to not feel guilty for what you're doing, or you want the victim that you are delivering your punishment to not blame you for it.
Absolutely. 100%. And as we'll see later on, she doesn't appear to think that she has any victims, even though a conviction did spring out of this. But there's still no victims, apparently. So moving on to the kind of the thing that everybody that covers this talks about, and it's usually a lot of the focus, is the fact that despite shunning the modern world, despite apparently living in the Victorian ages with no electricity or anything, they were also making video games, which makes perfect sense. So in August 1985, they released their first text-based video game called The Secret of St. Brides. And on the game tape themselves, they refer to themselves as the games Mistresses of St. Brides School. And it is Sister Angelina, basically, is the woman creating all of this. But at this time, she's known as Priscilla Langridge. That is the name that she's mostly going by. And apparently, she may have written the games with one other person. And basically, back then, there was some bit of software called the Quill, where you could write these games. So she wasn't necessarily like coding, but she was like writing these text-based games. And that's another thing as well, like considering the fact that she's essentially created this religion, originally like Lux Madriana. There's a real kind of like storytelling element to her. Like she, like throughout all of these different magazines and publications, she's always writing different stories, lots of different names, lots of different characters. So apparently Mary also drew some of the artwork, and as you can see, like it's quite sexual, like this, just like the main bit, it is like, it's a bit kind of bondagey. So apparently in this game you play Trixie Trinium, who is a headstrong young woman who has to discover the secret of St. Brides. And the secret is that Trixie's from the modern world. The house is in the 1920s, and she basically needs to find her way back to the modern world. You can actually play this game, I think, on archive.org. Obviously, St. Bride's School, like this whole thing is modelled on St. Trinian's. But also there was a book series called Nancy and St. Brides, which was published in 1923, which is probably another one of their influences. And according to a later interview with Priscilla Langridge, she said that the actual real secret of St. Brides is to rub out the lines between fantasy and reality. What do you think about that statement, Reid?
I don't want, that's something that you can certainly enjoy doing by playing a video game, right? You lose yourself, you get immersed in it. A good book can do that as well. The specific fantasy that they're sort of selling is not one I would like reality to be replaced by. It's a very sinister, even though it's sort of branding, like with the drawings that Langridge had put together in those pamphlets. It's not that different from other kinds of character designs or costuming that mainstream video games would have. That kind of very sexualized. look. But putting all these things together, it's I think it's fascinating that I think it was Langridge quoted as saying this, that she thought that television was a wholly corrupting influence on society, but that because it sort of distracts you, but that video games, because they demand your full attention, or computer games demand your full attention, they could be sort of a force for good. But that kind of total replacement of your sense of reality because you're so immersed in a video game, again, just combined with the kind of corporal punishment, behavior modification that they were so enthusiastic about. I mean, it just, it really gives me the impression that they were trying to brainwash people. And video games are an excellent way for kind of training people to dissociate and to get used to dissociating, sort of as a new skill.
Absolutely. And even Mary said on that BBC podcast, she said that everything they did was about whether there was a way that they could explain their worldview. So like, and you'll see it in some of the later games as well. But I haven't played this game, but I'm sure that there's like little nuggets in here of like their worldview that they've managed to kind of weave into the story. So up until this point, their public persona has obviously been one of anti-technology, and to keep up appearances, they told this like bizarre story to the press about how Priscilla Langridge, who was a student at St Bride's, she wasn't, she's been there from the very beginning, had snuck a Commodore 64 in, and Mary had begrudgingly agreed to allow this small piece of the modern world into St Bride's. Total nonsense. That is a fiction that they created. So in the BBC podcast, there was a local photographer named Patrick. He was hired to take promotional photographs of the Secret of St Bride's game. And he said that the house was so dark, he had to use his camera flash to light the way. He also said that there was a padded room in the house. And he was taken to the computer room where he met either Priscilla Langridge or another member of the group. We're not entirely sure who. But he says that she had an original Mac and a PC. So at some point when they have journalists at the house, they get very like secretive. And they're like, oh, you can't see in this room, you can't see in this room. And it's because it's like, yeah, they've got technology in there. So that would be why they were doing the secrecy. And he said that the lighting in this room was a tiny table lamp and that the room was pitch black. And he ended up taking photographs of the computer screen and the room itself. That's another thing about Priscilla Langridge. You'll never see a picture of her face. The only time that we've ever seen her is that first bit, like where they're the Rhennes community, and it's that interview with her at the very beginning. Apart from that, hides her face completely. Apparently, they also once asked an electrician out to the property, and when he came to the property, he was like, "Why have you called me out here? You ain't even got lights." And they were like, "Oh, but we haven't got lights, but we've got a bunch of computers. But we also live in the dark ages." So it makes total sense. In September 1985, Helen Gilmore left the group, and she later said that there was something sinister at the heart of it. The founder was a remarkable person, but was leading a fantasy life. We were living in someone else's fantasy. It kind of lends itself to what you were saying, Reid, about like that it is like somebody's created this world and they're trying to like brainwash people into it by any means necessary, be it video games, corporal punishment, anything that they can think of. Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
Just checking. So they followed these games up with a few others. We've got the Snow Queen, the Very Big Cave Adventure, and Bugsy. These came out in 1986. They're all kind of simple text adventure games. But the most controversial of all was Jack the Ripper, which was released in 1987. And it was the first ever computer game to get an 18 rating. Now, part of that was a publicity stunt on behalf of the game's publisher. They'd wanted to get an 18 rating on a game. And the way that they chose to do it was to put these images in. So these images, and also combined with some of the text that was in the game, because Priscilla Langridge had read the original Jack the Ripper police reports and had used their descriptions of dead bodies. And I've got a little clip from the podcast just on this Jack the Ripper thing.
But everything was about, is there a way that we can explain our worldview? I think some brides would have had things about, we were very keen on the schoolgirl novels of Angela Brazil because they had those, it sounds funny, perhaps so modern world, but they had jolly good fun and having an adventure. And so some brides were probably, as well as the intellectual challenges of the puzzles, enjoying those kind of young and innocent feelings. But Jack the Ripper game, which was the first adventure game to get an X rating, I don't quite know how that happened, but it did. That had a scene in it that was about Freud and Marx, and Darwin had the myth of evolution. The purveyors of what we thought of as modern myths understand that evolution happened in some kind of way, but we really don't believe that we've kind of grown up from fish or monkeys. Like human beings are a reflection of the divine archetype and divine image. But it's like these were three great forces that shaped the modern world the way it is now and drew it away from a spiritual understanding of life with God at the center. So here's an adventure game about Jack the Ripper, but really the underlying purpose was like philosophical education. I don't suppose many people got it.
And she refers to it as a philosophical education. She basically just confirms what you said, Reid. She confirms your theory, I think.
Yeah, I mean, she's not trying to hide it. She's sort of spelling out the game that she's playing at various points.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's around this time that they start to adopt a slightly different aesthetic. We are getting ready for another rebranding, and the world building is going to become a whole lot more elaborate. This is the beginning of the Victorian Romantic era, also known as Romantia.
I thought I might read you something. It's from the Queen's Resolve and her doubly royal reign of 60 years.
It would be very nice, ma'am.
During one of the earlier visits of the royal family at Balmoral, the late Prince Consort, dressed in a very simple manner, was crossing one of the Scotch lakes in a steamer. He was curious to note everything relating to the management of the vessel, and among other things the cooking. Approaching the galley where a brawny Highlander was attending to the culinary matters, he was attracted by the savoury odours of a compound known by Scotchmen as corporal.
So I think I said in this, because we've got like a Google Doc that I just was putting stuff in, I put, how do they keep getting so much publicity? And Reid, your comment was, we ask as we give them even more.
Yeah, it's hard to I was making fun of the early TV coverage they were getting, but it's working on us as well because they're just so bizarre, and you need to sort of understand what is it they're actually trying to do. And especially when they keep doing their rebranding, it does make sense as sort of a almost like a, hey, get a load of these freaks kind of local interest piece. Why they would be able to get so much publicity, but it still is it's suspicious to me that they are able to get on such big platforms.
Yeah, me too. And it's, they just seem to every time they invite controversy, of course, but still, like, the levels of publicity that they've had, I guess just because it's so infinitely fascinating. But yeah, like let's again, someone asking in the chat, who is funding them? Where are they getting their money from? And also, they are just living out her fantasy, or the fantasy of a few people, you know, and in that way it becomes kind of very culty, because you essentially just following this woman around. There are some interviews as well that I'm going to show you, just because this gives you kind of a bit more of an idea of like their thinking at the time. So this was from the same piece that it's from the Late Late Show, March 1988.
Well, in our house in Burtonport, we live as Victorians. I am the mistress, Miss Rhennes the housekeeper. The other girl that you saw on the film is Sophia, and she's the maid. And there are also other people in the house who are my friends, and we think of ourselves as the family, although we're not related.
Yes. And what is the purpose of this experiment? Why are you living this way in these clothes?
Well, we live this way because we like it, because we have fun dressing in beautiful feminine clothes, because we enjoy listening to records on our wind-up gramophone and different ways that we have of entertaining ourselves. We don't concern ourselves with the present at all. We live in a little world inside our house. We like the beauty of the area we live in, and that one drives through if one's going to Donegal Town or somewhere like that. It's a world apart, really, where we are.
When did you buy this big house in Burtonport where you live?
I bought it 6 years ago.
And what year are you living in? Is there a precise year or,
no,
or
there isn't.
an era?
No, there isn't a precise year. The different members of the household actually favour different periods within the Victorian era. Miss Rhennes is rather more of a late Victorian, and I'm a very early Victorian. I like being following Queen Victoria's early part of her reign, and enjoy being demure and modest and ladylike. And Miss Linda Terrell, who's a distant cousin of mine who lives with me, she favours crinolines. This isn't a crinoline, this is too early for crinolines. You see, underneath dresses such as this, you'd wear many layers of petticoats, but she favours the crinoline area herself.
And is this an escape from the hustle and bustle of the modern world? Is that it?
No, we see it as something much more creative and enjoyable than that. We do very active and full things with our life, and we don't see it as an escape, no.
So in March 1988, we get this article, comes out in the Sunday Telegraph. It's by Candida Crew. She goes to the house just to kind of do like a write-up. She says that there's 4 to 6 women living there in total. They claim to not like cars or fridges because of the indignity of their design. And this is where this kind of idea comes in, that like not all technology is evil. Not everything is bad. But the way that the modern world has designed stuff is like terrible. She interviews Priscilla Langridge, who's the Sister Angelina character that we've only seen like very once at the beginning, privately. And she mentioned that in her early childhood, her mother didn't approve of schools. So she was kind of like homeschooled in a way. And she claims that she studied at Oxford in an unofficial sort of a way for a year. And that kind of lends itself into this later idea that all of this started at Oxford University, and there was a theology scholar involved, and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't know how much of that is real and how much of that is actually like myth building again. She also mentions that they make their living selling the video games, and she says that we lead our life and earn our living on the side. We have to take advantage of our talents to live this kind of life. Computer games are an interesting form of fiction. We like writing fairy tales so we can use our imaginations and indirectly enhance our lifestyle. Kind of reminds me of like Heaven's Gate. They were all like a lot of them were like IT programmers. Lots of them worked in technology. That's how a lot of them were making their living.
It's also similar to the Finders cult. They were very involved in actually, I think, doing computer related contracting for it was either some federal agencies or NGOs that got U.S. government funding in the DC area. So that's a recurring theme with some of these cults that do seem, like they wouldn't jive with modern technology. Having a lot of people who are either, like you were saying, with Heaven's Gate, have that as their job, or they're embracing it in some other way. This is not a well-known cult, but Synergia Ranch, which is this New Mexico-based cult in the early 70s, run by a guy named J.P. Allen, who is more famous for founding Biosphere 2, that kind of enclosed, simulated ecosystem that is now owned by Arizona State University. They were also weirdly into trying to train members to be scientists and use modern technology, even though they were trying to be self-sufficient in the middle of the New Mexico desert. So it's just an interesting recurring pattern where you see that sort of deployment or recruitment of people who have a technology background.
Absolutely. Tanner asks, weren't they also doing stuff for the Commodore 64? I'm assuming, I don't know who he's referring to. Finders, maybe?
Yeah, maybe them.
Maybe. Where was I? Oh, so in this article here, Tanner says the Finders. Finders doing stuff for the Commodore 64. I do not know. So in this article, they mention their magazine, The Romantic, which is this magazine. And they had one woman at their house in Burton Port called Miss Walsingham, and she lived in Clapham, and she would occasionally visit the house in Ireland. And I suspect that she's probably one of the people that kind of published this magazine for the first time, because in these first issues, they list the publisher, which is Perfect Publications, as being in London, but this is definitely them. They also published, let's go back. They also published a title called Imperial Angel in this time, which calls itself a magazine for those who dare to make their lives outside of Babylon. And this is where we really start to see this group talk about forming their own sovereign nation. They claim that this newspaper, Imperial Angel, is the first national newspaper of the nation of Romantia. And importantly, while the previous iteration was women only, this is now open to men as well. They say that Romantia is a nation where women are pure and feminine, and men are chivalrous and true. Servants are loyal and trusting. And Romantia is the whole world before the final collapse of civilization in the 1960s. And this is where this idea of the 1960s being the end of civilization. I mentioned it before, we don't like the counterculture, etc., but this is kind of where it gets kind of solidified. As you can see, it just from looking at it, if you saw that, Reid, what would your initial thoughts be if you just saw this, a news agent somewhere?
I would think that this is some neo-Nazis attempt at a women's magazine. It's just from the font of the front page to the logo to the title, Imperial Angel. It sounds very, not even trying to hide that this is some kind of fascist rag. Just everything about it screams it.
Yes, exactly. And Ivy Bell says, the font has changed from the wishy-washy Celtic style to full-on goth/fash font. And you see that a lot. There's also the use of the Celtic cross again that comes into this a lot. So in this magazine and in their romantic magazine as well, They seem to allow modern electronic equipment into their homes now, only if it's used in the right way. So for instance, if you want to watch a film from the 1930s, you can bring that into your house, have like your equipment, you can have a video player or whatever, but it has to be hidden up. Like you can't see it. They say that they're not against technical innovation, that they are against the moral and cultural collapse of the 1960s. Later on down the line, they put a date on this, and they say, was it 1968 that they say, Reid?
So they mention that specific date a couple of times, but usually they just refer to the 1960s in general, although I think as we sort of figured out, I think why they're using it to refer to 1968 as the real culprit year of that decade.
Yeah, and we were trying to figure out what exactly it was that kind of sparked 1968 as the turning point. My theory is that that's when the Race Relations Act was passed in the UK. And considering who they have been associating with in this era, who, yeah, as you will see, I think my theory might be, well, our theory may be correct. They again refer to Rhennes, Agent NDN on Twitter DM'd me with the correct way to say Rhennes Gunnor. Rhennes Gunnor. Okay, Rhennes Gunnor. There we go. I've said it correctly. They refer to him as the greatest sage of this century and the man most responsible for reintroducing traditional doctrine in its pure form to the modern world. They also claim to be selling stockings, 2 for £1, to any reader that wants them. So the second issue of Imperial Angel comes out, and it comes complete with a map. And this is supposedly a guide. Yes, I was going to say this as well. 1968, April 1968 is when Enoch Powell did his Rivers of Blood speech. So this map comes out, and it's supposedly a guide to the psychic territory outside the late 20th century, a magical world which can enrich our lives and open the way to numberless magical adventures. They say that Romantia has several ways of dealing with time in order to break the psychological hegemony of the late 20th century, or Babylon, and sometimes they refer to the outside world as the octopus. They see this period of time as a psychic territory which has been colonized by modernists. They claim that that modernism is precisely equivalent to Bolshevism, the ideology of Soviet Russia, and is forced upon people by a powerful and ruthless elite. What do you think of that, Reid?
Sounds very familiar. I don't know, it's just kind of eerie, the aesthetic, the sort of shadowy elite that are manipulating the masses behind the scenes to lead, society into moral and cultural degeneration. It's ringing a very strong bell. That, almost. I'm getting impressions of. I can't quite place it, but maybe sometime in the 1930s. Some protocols of some elders.
Yeah. I think you're probably right there. They refer to this like Romantia and its provinces as a psychic empire. So effectively, this is like this all exists within the mind, and they say that the fortified borders of Romantia are, like Romantia as a whole, a psychic reality. They are our most potent protection against the psychic invasion of Babylon and the front line in the Great Babylonian War. And according to them, Romantia is a nation under constant psychic attack from the modern world. So we're getting into, I'm going to just do a warning now. We're getting into the bad stuff. So if you don't want to watch, feel free to tap out now, because we're getting into where they're fascist, overt fascist material. So alongside the Romantic, they published this, which is the English magazine, which they say is somewhat of a supplement to the Romantic. Inside it, they claim that it has been endorsed by both Peregrine Worsthorne and Enoch Powell, which is wonderful. Great endorsement. I'm unsure of who exactly edited it and put it together. But in the magazine, they say it's Miss Prism, and she's described as the governess at an old school, aka St. Bride's. Vibes-based prediction. I think it might be Mary. This is just like, I mean, you've read through some of this, Reid. What do you think about this publication specifically?
So it has their kind of trademark flowery, very repetitive, and kind of extremely pretentious style that you mentioned some of their earlier publications had. But this one is really leaning into, like it says, the name of the zine, the English magazine, like very strong kind of almost the sort of like late 19th century, early 20th century English chauvinism, where it's like the kind of reactionary that doesn't think the French are white, even, that really has a very narrow view of the world. And as we'll get into with some of the content of this publication specifically later, they tend to couch the really outright fascist stuff in kind of a different superficial issue, like with their very militant anti-metrication stance. They sort of pick very seemingly non-political issues to then use as a way into, metrication is actually a Bolshevik conspiracy.
Yeah, it gets pretty nuts. Full disclosure, I didn't read through much of this English magazine because I after like trying to read through the Coming Age and stuff, I couldn't stomach it anymore. I started to lose the plot a little bit. But I know that in issue 3, there's an article from Priscilla Langridge where she's very, because Priscilla Langridge, again, she's the Sister Angelina person from the beginning, appears to be very obsessed with hierarchies. And she writes in issue 3 that under normal circumstances, human beings are aristocratic, hierarchical, and courteous. Only when disruptive, egalitarian institutions are forced upon them do they behave otherwise. The idea of courtesy as something enforced by upper-class bullies smacks of socialistic propaganda and of Darwinistic disrespect for humanity as a whole. Hierarchical societies may be disrupted by many things, from the collapse of social order to the inculcation of destructive liberal ideologies. And she says, in American cities, where the cult of democracy and vulgarity has gone much further, and where cultural values have been more profoundly disrupted by melting pot conditions and ideologies, the murder rate is unprecedented. Like, this is just outright racist bullshit, right? Like, it's very mask
sort
off.
of thing that you see in other right-wing publications that are more that they don't have all these trappings, right? It's interesting that for all of their pretense to in their various sort of identities, they have the mythology of, we're goddess worshippers, or we're running a school, or we're defending English civilization. But it's basically just the kind of FBI crime statistic out of context racism that you get from any boilerplate reactionary.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like you'd expect something like this on like that End Wokeness Twitter account. It's that kind of stuff. So the English magazine, along with another newsletter called the Reactionary Review and the Intelligencer, contains the most overt far-right writings. They published an article by this guy. Who is this guy, Reid? Michael A. Hoffman II.
So he is a leading American Holocaust denier and self-styled, maximum scare quotes disdain, revisionist historian is the way that he would like you to think about him. But he's what? So I mean, I think a lot of people have a list of names that they keep in the back of their mind. That when you need to think about the people that you have on your dartboard. Michael Hoffman is one of those guys. He's sort of been a prolific, not just Holocaust denier, but overall and all around reactionary kind of theorist. He is very involved in sort of constructing the mythos behind the James Shelby Downard kind of mythology, and is the author of a book that sometimes gets play among people who don't know about his background or the real agenda that he has, but called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. So he tries to insert himself into various kind of counterculture spaces to lead people towards his extreme neo-Nazi Holocaust denial and magical worldview. He's got a very magical worldview that I think is genuine as well as being a sort of way to get people's critical thinking softened up before he hits them with tales of gas chambers being fake. But he's one of the I hate this motherfucker. He's such a bastard.
Yeah. Do you think that like this group, we call them Aristasia, but just to be like very clear about it, at the point in the timeline that we're up to, like Aristasia doesn't really exist at the moment. Aristasia comes later, but I'm just using Aristasia as a catch-all kind of term for who they are. But do you think that like the Aristasians have like a lot of similarities with him? Like you mentioned that like he kind of uses these texts to kind of bring people in. It sounds very similar, especially when people that might have gotten into this through like just having a genuine interest in worshipping a goddess, an interest in kind of like an alternative lifestyle, and suddenly a few years down the line they're now being given the English magazine that's got this in it.
Yeah, it's an attitude that I think, or a strategy almost of concealing your real agenda and avoiding consistent scrutiny that I think is best described as Discordian. They're very much in that kind of tradition, whether they have direct ties to Discordians or Discordianism or not. Michael Hoffman certainly does. It's that approach of just using multiple personas, creating hoaxes, playing these weird long games that to any outside observer seem like they must have something genuine at the core, because why else would somebody go around LARPing as a Victorian or LARPing as Romantia, whatever that's supposed to mean. But really at the heart of it, all there ends up really being is, you're being sold Nazism or you're being sold reactionary politics at the end of it. And it's sort of building a mystique to make it seem like it's more than it really is.
Absolutely. It's some of this gets a little bit disturbing. So this is one that you picked out because it's talking about women's emancipation from the workplace, and that women should actually be involved in domestic service. And the girls that haven't had any service have now had to fend them for themselves. And it's very kind of like, again, we're kind of getting into that, like the modern world's breaking up the family kind of deal.
Mm-hmm. And it again, for all the sort of not anti-male, they don't really have kind of an anti-male politics, but the emphasis on sort of what appears like at first glance empowering women with this, grand tradition of there's the goddess and there's humans are naturally female, but then their vision for what women are meant to do is servant girls and living a life of both figurative and literal bondage to an aristocratic mistress, which is very much compatible with the male chauvinist politics of someone like Julius Evola and plenty of people that they're ostensibly in disagreement with.
Absolutely. Tanner asks, can I get an armchair diagnosis on this group's leader? Do you feel confident in doing that, Reid?
Sorry, say that again.
Tanner wants an armchair diagnosis of this group's leader.
Oh, gee. I mean, I
put you on the spot.
more of her personal history that we would need to get into to really do that. But I think, like many successful cult leaders, she certainly got some narcissism. I think there's definitely a lot of that, and I don't know. I'm not comfortable saying any kind of like actual diagnosis, other than she is working for somebody, and she is whatever her diagnoses are, they're being put to effective use in some kind of an experiment.
And that's the interesting thing as well, because you seem like Mary is this kind of, she's the public face of this, right? So she becomes the person that the press will kind of flock to, and her face is everywhere. But a lot of people say that Priscilla, Langridge, Sister Angelina, whoever it is, who's this very kind of like secretive, you never see her. She adopts a million personalities, again, Mary does as well, but she's very much behind the scenes. She's not a public facing person at all. And that might be for a myriad of different reasons, but it you know, especially in like today's society, I understand there was some speculation that she might be a trans woman, and obviously in the 80s that may not be something that you would feel comfortable being public, but you know, especially with a lot of the kind of interest and intrigue in this group, I feel like for that person to still be, nobody really knows who they are, it's just a little bizarre, it's a little strange. So this is the Intelligencer, and this is a whole piece that they wrote. It must have come out obviously pre 1991, because it's talking about basically the Republic, as they write, this is from them, not me. The Republic of South Africa continues to follow Rhodesia down the path of what one commentator has termed righteously opting for self-extinction. And this whole article is just like a pining for both for Rhodesia and for apartheid. So again, like, it's just outright, like, very blatant. And they put out all of these different publications. They call this one an occasional review of late 20th century affairs, but it is all the same people. And it's just, yeah, very intense.
Something that's notable about the sort of very the way that they talk about the fall of apartheid South Africa is they're obviously sympathetic and fans of both Rhodesia and the apartheid system, but their tone is always extremely sort of holier than thou, even sort of to the extent that they sort of talk about their fellow reactionaries. They have this sort of pretense to understanding the mechanisms of history and make very bold predictions about where things are going. So, you know, back to Tanner's question of what's the diagnosis here, I think definitely some very strong megalomania. These are, or, you know, at least Mary specifically, really likes to have that sort of vision of herself. And it comes through especially in this period of the writings.
Absolutely. And then this is also from the Intelligencer. And here we've got outright Holocaust denial. So I'll read it just so you can hear it. But in this, they say, who will speak of the extraordinary amount of evidence that the Nazis did not have a policy of exterminating European Jews, and that the gas chambers were a piece of post-war atrocity propaganda? So I feel like when people, and this is what I was saying to you, right? This has been like covered quite extensively by like a lot of different publications. They've got a lot of mainstream press, a lot of publicity. They even had a podcast, BBC podcast series, and nobody has picked up on this? Just kind of baffling.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, in some ways, it's typical of mainstream media like the BBC podcast series to sort of just leave their investigation of the reactionary politics of this group at the sort of rumors of neo-Nazi pamphlets lying around in the house that they used to use, or the correspondence with BNP leader John Tyndall. But these publications are just sort of available on the web. They've been around well within the time period that BBC series was being put together. And it's strange that they didn't think it was important enough a part of the story to really investigate further.
Absolutely. Yeah, to me, like, this is probably the most important part of it. Especially, like, as you say, like, if the people that are creating, and I say the people because it's still so baffling, like, who is behind this whole thing, whether it's just Mary and this Sister Angelina Priscilla language character, or whether there's more people involved. But if it is just those two, and this has always just been fascism at its core, and the rest is all just window dressing just to pull people in to the ideology, then it is like a massive part that people just haven't seemed to have reported on. And I feel like that just makes it very clear, like, you cannot argue with the things that they have written themselves. So in December 1988, The Spectator, again, and bear in mind, this is in the same time period that all of their, like, fascist writings coming out. The Spectator published Mary's romantic manifesto, where she claims that the romantic movement was born out of an Oxford women's college. And she says that to the outside world, they may appear eccentric, but the outside world doesn't consist of people who count. She says that the classless society, whether socialist or Thatcherite, is a bad thing, and claims that the distinctions between social classes are one of the foundations of civilization. She says that the decline of domestic service, social deference, and natural organic hierarchies has been a decivilizing influence upon every class of society. And she says that the ideal romantic menage includes a number of voluntary bonded servants who are looked after and protected in return for their service in a quite feudal manner, thus making the household a microcosm of the ideal romantic feudal state. What do you think about that, Reid?
It's the kind of worldview that I don't know why, of all the possible versions of a hierarchical society where, obviously these are people that see themselves at the top of that sort of feudal system, but it doesn't seem like the sort of thing that's, if you're going to choose anything, why would you choose that unless you're just a sicko who wants to have, extreme control over people, and everything that this group does kind of speaks to that.
Yeah. And we just had somebody like a Holocaust denier in the chat that I've just had to ban, which is great. Maybe that is somebody that follows this and found out that this stream was happening and came in and decided to share their shitty opinion. Anyway, so she also says, like, in this romantic manifesto, that they view the end of the real stock exchange as a milestone in the decline of the West. I wasn't sure what they was referring to here. I was thinking that, like, the end of the real stock exchange, is that like the Great Depression? Is that something to do with that? I wasn't entirely sure.
I don't. It might be to do with new regulation that was introduced. There was sort of, like, I know that at least in Canada there was in the late 80s, early 90s, there were new regulatory measures introduced that sort of ended a period of particularly in the Vancouver stock exchange, kind of like a golden age for scams and con artists, but I'm not sure what they're referring to either.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So skipping forward a little bit, in March 1990, Sophia, who was featured in those late show pieces that I showed you, she's the maid, she came forward to the Sunday Mirror. She claimed that she had been at the house for 15 months after originally coming there because she was interested in the idea of returning to Victorian values to find inner peace and fulfillment. She said that she wrote several letters to Mary Scarlett saying how interested she was in her ideas. She visited several times over the course of a year. She said that nothing seemed out of place, although now looking back at it, she realises just how stupid she was. Those are her words. She said that people will be shocked when they find out what really goes on in the house. I was told I would be the maidservant and would have to dress accordingly. There was a strict pecking order with Mary Scarlett as mistress and Priscilla Langridge as her deputy. And Miss Rayner, the housekeeper, was my boss. We all existed frugally. The rooms were cold and damp. The food was horrible. We ate heavily spiced dog scraps. Things went wrong when Miss Rayner left and I was taken under the wing of Mistress Scarlett. That was when the beatings started. I'm just going to play you a bit from her interview with the BBC podcast.
Sophia paints a picture of a surreal, almost dreamlike existence in the house. A place where time stood still, far from the modern world just outside the front door.
There were no clocks, no calendars. I had no inkling of the passage of time. I actually spoke up to Mary Scarlett. We were in the kitchen, stood in front of the meat safe in the back door, and I said, I'm not happy here. I would like to leave. What a torrent was forthcoming from her. The infrequent letters that I received from my mom as I tried to maintain a relationship with her. Obviously, Mary Scarlett picked up on that and gave me a lecture. I did tell you contact with family and friends in the outside world wasn't good for you. But yes, the torrent when I asked to leave, it's actually a major part of my complex PTSD now. You can't go out into the outside world. You were a nothing there. You will be a nothing. They never valued you. We value you. On and on it went. Such humiliating, demeaning words. Such fury. Such anger. I taught myself to hide all rebellious thoughts, all homesickness, everything by imagining a maze in my mind, and at the centre of the maze being a splendid statue. And that is all I would concentrate on, was getting through this maze, because I knew that there was this splendid statue in the middle of it, and that's all I needed to do. And so I did that quite often.
Sophia says she had no money of her own, and this left her with few options.
Now, what I do remember is all punishments didn't happen immediately. It would be a long time when you'd forgotten. So, long time afterwards, when I couldn't remember what it was about, I was told to go to my bedroom and lie on the bed and wait for her. And she come in with a cane and cane me on the bottom and tops of the thighs. And then afterwards, she had a ritual where I have to curtsy in front of her and thank her for the punishment. And then she would open her arms and hug.
Can I ask, and I hope you don't mind me asking Sophia a very direct question, just for the sake of clarity, that when she would come into the room, would she tell you what she was going to do, and would she ask you if she was allowed to do it?
No, there was no confirming of consent as we know it today. The continual enthusiastic consent for something to happen. No, I would just be told that I would be getting the cane.
Just like, I mean, listening to her, and I've got another clip as well. But like Ivabel says in the chat, that poor woman, textbook cult behaviour. It's just horrific. Like listening to what she went through. And she also said that she was brainwashed into their way of life, that she hated these beatings, but she just didn't think that anything was wrong, like at the time. She said that she used to hear Mary Scarlett shouting at Priscilla Langridge at night, and Priscilla whimpering in a little girl's voice. Then she would hear the swish of the cane and Priscilla's cries. And I'm going to play you the last clip from Sophia about how she finally left.
Sophia then tells me about an elderly woman who came to visit. She refers to her as Mavis. She says she was a former nanny who told her she was researching a book Mavis was interested in finding out about, and it seems had consented to participating in punishment and physical discipline in the house. After dinner, Mavis managed to find a moment to speak to Sophia.
She turned to me and she said to me, "Sophia, I can see that you're terrified of her. Find some time to talk to me tonight." So that's exactly what I did.
Although it was against house rules, Sophia sneaked up the stairs to Mavis's room that night and says she was shocked by what she saw.
And she lifted her nightgown and showed me the thighs, backs of the thighs. And she told me her age. From recollection, she was in her early to mid 70s. And just a mess. Stripes and bruises. And she hugged me and said, "Yeah, she's a real sadist. Wouldn't stop when I asked her to. Wouldn't stop beating me." And she said, "What's your situation? Do you want to leave?" I said, "Yes. I don't have any money." Well, the next day we found out. Both Mavis and myself were summoned by Scarlett.
Sophia says they were both told to go to the schoolroom.
We had to write lines. And after that, she bent Mavis over the desk and said, "You were caught after you were bedtime conversing together in the bedroom. You'll get however many strikes it was." And then she did the same to me. The horror of seeing and hearing Mavis being caned once again, after knowing what she was being caned over and how she could barely move. She was moving so gingerly because of the pain of it. It was wicked.
So it was that beating that she witnessed that led Sophia to leave, and she went to like a phone box and called her dad, and she went to a neighbour's house, like one of the neighbours of the St Bride's school, and she managed to get out and go home. But it was again, like, this is kind of what you were talking about, Reid, like behaviour modification, but it's kind of when they're put in the press and doing all these promotional activities, it's kind of implied that this is consensual, right? That, like, you know, women are coming here and they're consenting to these beatings, but this is very clearly not being consented to.
Definitely not. And even just the question of what it would mean to have like consent in a meaningful sense in that situation, where you've got, you know, multiple levels of brainwashing. You have a punishment system of using physical violence to get people to, you know, follow the rules, whatever those are, on a daily basis. Who knows how they change, you know, and sort of are up to the whims of Mary or whoever else is supposed to be playing the character, who's in the top position of authority. But it's not what a lot of the people, or a lot of the women who would have attended this, the meetings and the different kind of experiences that this group put on, would have expected, right? It's not, if you're a cult that's using this kind of corporal punishment to brainwash people, or even just coerce them in a shallower sense, it's not what's in the pamphlet, right? It might sort of seem like a fun or a titillating or a creative way of really immersing yourself in the LARP experience, but nobody's going to think it's going to end up with that kind of horrific treatment.
Yeah, exactly. So in the original article, she also mentioned, this article I've got on the screen, she mentions that she discovered pornography in the house. She realised that St Bride's had actually been advertising in sex magazines under corporal punishment sections. And I wonder, like, whether some of that was like financially motivated, you know, like at some point they've got to kind of pay for their upkeep, and, you know, if you're already kind of doing that stuff, it'd be very easy to like pivot into that kind of industry. And they definitely did pivot into that later in the 90s, which we're not going to be able to get to tonight. So we definitely have to do a part 2. the Mirror, Daily Mirror, Sunday Mirror, that did this article, sent 2 women reporters to the school, and they reported back that they were told that there is nothing like a good thrashing to cleanse the soul. Sophia pursued assault charges against Mary, and Mary was eventually convicted and fined £100. But when she was questioned about it as part of the Assume Nothing podcast, she was adamant that she had done nothing wrong, as you can hear here.
Can I ask a difficult question, Mary? And I'll just be honest that it's probably a difficult question, so it's entirely up to you whether you talk about it or not. Because obviously, you know, it's no secret that there was a court case at the end of the St. Bride's time. I don't know if that's something you feel you can talk about now, or would you rather not?
Oh, yeah, I don't mind talking about it. This was somebody who came to be part of the community. She knew that there was discipline involved. I gave her a little. I didn't give her much discipline because she was I might have only done it that once. I really don't remember. But it was a little tiny birch twig bite with a little tiny mark on her leg. And you know, people came. They struggled with they had in them their modern worldview, and the part of them that was trying to be different. And it was easy for one to overtake the other. And she decided to have a little tantrum, freak out about it, and went to the police station. And it resulted in this conviction. But to be honest, like, it seemed a bit amusing at the time and amusing now, because I knew the punishments I had given other people, and I knew the punishment I'd given her was like, it was just a bit absurd. You know, I moderately prefer if it wasn't. I would prefer if it wasn't in the podcast, because it's very ancient history. I never had anything like that brought up about me again. And I don't mind answering to you, but I don't really want that talked about, because it's part of the discipline is not an important part, and it's certainly nothing to do with anything I do now. And I am doing things in the world now rather than not in the world. So I wouldn't really want that part of it publicised.
Okay, I mean, you understand as a journalist, Mary, it is part of the story in a way about what happened at the end of St. Bride's.
I don't agree. If you think it's important to talk about the stupid thing that happened when a little girl decided to, you know, a little girl in spirit, then I won't do any more interviews, because that is so not important. And I've been frank with you and honestly have answered your questions on the assumption that you are going to edit it in a way that worked for me. And if you're going to put that in, then these interviews are finished.
Well, I wouldn't make that guarantee to Mary that I would edit an interview in a way that suits the contributor. That's, you know,
No, I'm sorry. If you've understood everything I've said to think that that's important, then these interviews are finished and you can do what the F you like. I do not want that publicised.
But I just have
and
to say,
if you go ahead, you have to make it clear that the cooperation ended.
I just feel it is part of the story, and it would be remiss of me not to ask about it. So I've asked the question.
Well, this is the thing about journalists. You know, journalists came to St. Bride's and they said the public have a right to know, and the answer is no, the public don't have a right to know.
I can only ask the question, Mary, and I did ask the question. My last question on that front would be: do you have any regrets about that?
Of course not. I acted within the vision of what we were doing, that she'd been living in happily for 9 months. I'm not responsible for somebody going to the dark side. If she wanted to turn around after all you know, she was the lost soul that we gave time and attention and inclusion to. And she decided to flip out about something. That's her business.
Thoughts, Reid?
The way that she just has absolutely no remorse and just immediately goes on defensive is such classic kind of cult leader psycho behavior. She's just like, there's no even sense that she even thinks that she's done something wrong. Like you get the impression that she does believe what she says.
And it's the thing that stood out to me is what she says. She was like, I was under the impression this was going to be put together the way that's going to make me look really good. Like, it's like delusional.
Mm-hmm.
She's just like, I mean, with that controversial history, any person that, you know, was like, would be like, okay, well, this is obviously, they're going to be bringing up all kinds of stuff. I'm probably not going to come out with this looking very good, knowing the things that she knows about what she's done. But she just thinks that she's going to look great no matter what, which is kind of bizarre. So St Bride's School officially closed in 1990, and Mary and Sister Angelina, under the names Marianne Martindale and Priscilla Langridge, appear to move to Cambridge. And again, here's the press. Again, they're in the Cambridge Evening News. Bear in mind, that's just a local newspaper, but still, like, with every move, with every change, there is the press. So they give an interview to Nikki Blackburn, and they say that they're cousins. They're not cousins. This is a thing that they do. They like to say, they say that they're related, or their mother-daughter, or their daughter-mother, cousins, all this kind of stuff. They're not. And they claim that they're part of the Romantic movement that began in Oxford. And they say that they're holding classroom reenactments. And the article actually lists their phone number. So at the very end of the article, it says if you want to get in contact with them. So it almost works as like an advertisement piece for them, which is kind of bizarre, right?
Mm-hmm. It's really strange.
Like that the kind of press is like just working as like a mouthpiece for them. They're just like, oh yeah, if they want to join, here's the number to call. Just bizarre to me. So they say that Miss Langridge is quoted as saying, the late 20th century is a glitch between two different periods of civilization. We like to think that we are living in the future. People are gradually returning to more traditional ways. So in December of 1990, they begin taking out ads in the Cambridge Daily News. Victorian life and education, authentic reenactments ring Miss Martindale. But despite advertising in Cambridge newspapers in the late 1990s, they still actually have a house in Ireland, but they're not paying rent. So two members of the original Atlantis commune decided to climb in through a window around Christmas time in 1992. And after finding what they found in there, they decided to go to the Sunday Telegraph. And this article got published. Inside the secret world of the Sisters of St Bride's, neo-Nazi leaflets found in Gracious Ladies Academy, where caning was on the curriculum. So it says that anti-Semitic periodicals from all over the world lay in piles on the floor, alongside fetishistic magazines featuring women in gas masks and suspenders. Titles strewn around included National Front News and the British National Party's Spearhead. And this is National Front News from 1989. And you pointed this out, Reid. They both use Celtic cross in their imagery. And obviously that was a symbol that did get co-opted by white supremacists. Also, they found a 2-year correspondence with the leader of the British National Party, John Tyndall. Why do all people that have got like a hate-filled heart look like that? Is that something like when there's like evil on the inside, it will like project on the outside and you'll end up looking like that?
I think especially if you're the leader of one of these organizations and you've spent many hundreds of hours really developing your own Baroque racist takes, it does have to show in your face. You can't just spend that long getting that angry and being that hateful without really raising your blood pressure, losing a lot of sleep thinking about how the Jews are ruining society, and that's the end result. You look like what's inside your heart. Absolutely.
We call them gammon over here, like a kind of they're slightly pink in the face. They look like a ham, a gammon ham. So
you can do like the dictionary picture. Like this is the exhibit A.
Yeah, it really is. It really, really is. So in one letter it was either to Mary or Priscilla Langridge, he says that I admire and respect what you are doing to the point of fascination. And he says that he agrees entirely that there should be secession from the modern world. Of himself, he says that he is spiritually with one foot in the 19th century and the other in perhaps the 17th and 18th. I mean, this guy was just horrific. I've seen like pictures of him, and they when they were like running different campaigns during like national elections, they would run like the most horrifically racist campaigns you've ever seen in your life. Just awful stuff. So some Aristasians have tried to claim over the years that perhaps they just ended up on a dodgy mailing list, or perhaps something got sent to them without their consent. Absolutely not. This was a 2-year correspondence because he liked the things that these women were writing in their magazines. Like, as simple as that. There's no two ways about that in my mind. And he then kind of, when this kind of thing came out, it didn't look very good for him either, because he's all right, you know, with the outright fascism, but the spanking obviously called him into disrepute. So he like put this letter out to the Sunday Telegraph saying that he had no knowledge of any of the other goings on at St. Bride's, and that he actually had gotten interest in communicating with them via their publication, their romantic publications. And as an avowed anti-modernist, he found much to support in some of the ideas presented, hence the laudatory quotes. Also, in that issue of the Sunday Telegraph, there we go. There is this letter from somebody who calls themselves Miss Lindendorf. That is Mary. It was either Mary or Priscilla that wrote that letter, and basically saying that they reject all forms of anti-Semitism. They reject all of the political parties. They've got no interest in politics. They're totally apolitical. And Mary went on to deny that she'd ever been in any kind of correspondence with him. She kept like denying it, like throughout the years, even though it's like he admitted it and it's very obvious. But she like continued like way into like the late 90s. She just said, oh no. But then I guess it is kind of easy to deny it when you can just say like, oh, it was my alter that did it, like my other person that lives in my head. But yeah, that's so this kind of brings us to like the early 90s. And I think this is where we're going to like pause and maybe do like a part 2, because it does get a little bit, it will get so much more weirder from like here on out. But like this is the early stuff, right? Like this is the we've covered all of like their history and all of that. I'm like, I feel like I've been on like a whirlwind of far right nonsense.
Yeah, it's pretty dizzying, and just the way that she would keep denying the especially like the ties and correspondence with Tyndall. It's so ridiculous because of the one or two lines we know from one of the letters that he sent her. What was it? He said that I'm interested in what you are doing to the point of fascination. That doesn't sound like a passing, happenstance contact. That's somebody who is who you've told a lot about what you're doing and you're trying to get their attention.
Exactly. How would you briefly kind of sum up what their later iterations are like once they go online? Like, the kind of aesthetics that they adopt.
I mean, for a while they kind of maintain the sort of English nationalist vibe, but then they transition into what I think a lot of people would recognize today as sort of anime obsessed fascism. They really sort of were early. At least from my perspective, in embracing that sort of aesthetic, and definitely very into the kind of virtual, like using avatars, and they were deeply into Second Life, and plenty of sort of counterculture or alternative communities were into that kind of early internet, sort of proto-social media stuff, but I think, anime fascist is probably the the aesthetic I would go with.
Yeah, it goes pretty crazy. Do you feel like is there anything that you want to like expand on, or anything that you think we haven't covered in like this batch?
So I think just because we're cutting it off here, the stuff that I would want to talk about would make more sense in a part 2. But one thing I'll just talk about a little bit more is the sort of the way that they would recruit people into their organization, whether it was in the St. Bride school period or whether it was earlier. They were really sort of casting a wide net, and like many cults, using sort of an early stage kind of love bombing to try to get people to lower their defenses before introducing things like, especially in the St. Bride's period, the idea of physical punishment as a kind of spiritual submission. And in that period in particular, the kind of emphasis on embracing or reliving your adolescence, it's something that I think should be really scrutinized as what their intentions were. It's not. It seems too calculated. It's not just an organic sort of LARP of trying to figure out new ways of reclaiming old sort of traditions. It very much seems instrumental to me, and the way they went about recruiting people definitely indicates that to me.
Absolutely, yeah, I definitely agree, and I guess, yeah, it just is interesting. I think that one of the main people involved in this kind of was involved in like primary school education, is now a child therapist, is very much interested in like age regression, all of that kind of stuff. It's a little interesting. Strange connection.
It's very concerning because someone who and she had her training at the Pellin Institute pretty early on, right? It was like in the 70s. So all of the kind of psychological manipulation tricks that are kind of built into things like the St. Bride's experience, where you're getting people to really live this role of being a subservient, student to a headmistress. It's not. You can't really give any plausible deniability. It seems like somebody who had gone through that sort of training, I don't know how reputable the Pellin Institute's psychotherapy programs are, but you'd think that, it's pretty obvious that she knows what she's doing and attempting to do.
So I think the Pellin Institute, I didn't look into it much, but I think that they also advertised in that Q directory. So I think that they're very much like, I don't want to say like new age, but they're very kind of fringe, I would say. And I think that she is still involved in them today. Her name is Mary Gilliman now. She actually married the director of King Kong, the one with is it Jessica, the one with Jessica Lange? And the Towering Inferno, John Gilliman. She married him. She moved to California, but also lives. I got all of this. I didn't dox. I got all this from the podcast. She says all this out of her own mouth. But she also lives in somewhere in Mexico with one of the other members, who I suspect to be Priscilla Langridge, who adopted a quite popular online persona, and was possibly the Japanese language, like teaching language YouTube channel called Cure Dolly. So there's a lot. It's like so many layers of like bizarre stuff. I don't understand how these people have got like the capacity to like keep creating all these different like names and personas. It just seems very exhausting to me.
Yeah, I have no idea how any of the people who were in deep enough at any stage of this group kept any of their identities straight. It seems like you would have to forget, like, okay, am I Priscilla Langridge today? Am I Mary Scarlett today?
Yeah, it reminds me of I'm not on TikTok anymore because I deleted it, got rid of it. But when I was on it, there was this whole thing going around. But it was this person that had dissociative identity disorder. And they were talking about this system that they created called the Wonderland system. And they were talking about how they had at least, it was like hundreds of different alters and how they had kept track of them. And they had like a whole list and like a management system. And it reminded me so much of this, of like trying to keep track of all the who am I today? Am I this person? It's too much for me. Way too much. Even researching them is almost too much. Well, I guess that's the end of the first part. Unless you've got anything else to add, Reid.
No, I'll save it for part 2.
Okay. Okay, and I will say part 2 will get weirder, believe it or not.
So much weirder.
So much weirder. So thank you for everyone that has joined and everyone that's been in the chat and been watching. And if you're watching this back on the replay, I'm also interested, if you know anything about this group, you can reach out to me and email me or contact me via Twitter with any information that you think would be helpful, because so much of this is like trying to put pieces together. I'm not sure when the next stream is going to be of this, because this was quite an intense research thing. I was saying to Reid, you can tell that I don't have a job because I spent way too long immersed in this nonsense. But soon, it won't be too long, right? Right, Reid?
No, not too long.
Okay. All right, good. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and thank you to Reid, and we will see you very soon, and thanks for hanging out. I'm going to end the stream.
Thanks for having me.